All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Raw Intuition Health Show. We've got an incredible guest for you today, a very exciting episode, so I'm really looking forward to this one. We are talking with Jonathan Adams, or he goes by Sonic Yogi, and he is a musician, sound therapist, and so much more. And we're going to get into how sound can, for whether you're trying to reduce stress, reduce anxiety, or just change, your state, in your mental or emotional life. Sound can be very powerful in helping us to achieve higher levels of health. And by ignoring some of the sounds that don't support health, we can get into some issues. So I'm looking forward to learning more from Jonathan on that. And I'll read you his bio here. So Sonic Yogi, or Jonathan, was originated in 2012 after he experienced extreme anxiety. As a professional musician, he knew the potential of music to entertain and move our emotions. Now, following this experience, he discovered its power as a healing force. Since then, Jonathan has put his intention and focus into the exploration of the healing potential of music and has given talks and workshops on vibrational sound therapy at TEDx, National Spiritual Living Conferences, and more. His vibrational sound therapy tracks can be streamed on Spotify, Pandora, SoundCloud, YouTube, and the Insight Timer app. They're also used by Gold's Gyms nationally in Centergy and yoga classes. He continues to explore ways in which sound as a therapy can help people to relax, de-stress, enjoy deeper meditation, and feel great. So I know that is all interests of this audience, and so I'm excited to have Jonathan on the show to help us understand this realm a little bit better. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, I've always been, interested in music. I never got into music. I was never introduced to it really growing up, and so it's never been a huge part of my life. I do enjoy singing in the car, and listening to music and that. But just recently, so I went to a retreat in August, and they had sound baths that you could go to there. And I never actually went to a session. I wanted to, but I never actually got to. But I did walk past them here and there as they were going on. And something about it just, really caught my attention. And ever since then, I have been really interested in learning more about sound therapy, just music in general. And yeah, so you're one of the people online that I came across that were sharing this information, and I really resonate with your energy and just your message. And so yeah, I'm so thankful to have you on the show and learn more about how you got into this, which I guess is where we could start off. You're a professional musician, you do sound therapy and all this. So how did that come about, and what has that journey looked like for you?
Yeah, well, it's been a fairly long journey for me. I started, I guess I would start with just my musical journey, which I started, when I was young. My dad played guitar. I guess it was early teens, maybe. I picked up the guitar and started playing, and just became really interested in music. And then later majored in music in college. In university, I went to the University of Georgia in Athens and studied music there. And then ultimately from there began touring and performing classical music, and also what we called classical crossover. So I performed with the cellist and we played a mix of like classical arrangements along with our own originals, and then covers of things like Pink Floyd and things like that. And so I did that for about 15 years, touring all around the United States and traveling abroad a bit. And so that was really my career goal, was just to be a touring and performing musician. And somewhere along that journey, I started to experience anxiety, which I didn't really call it anxiety at the time. I wasn't really sure what it was. It was just kind of a physiological reaction. I would have these times where I was having, a lot of tension, maybe trouble breathing. I would have like digestive issues along with it, and yeah, just sort of overwhelming episodes, which I came to later realize were anxiety. And I had always just thought of anxiety as being like a little bit of worry or something. I didn't realize it could sort of take over your entire nervous system, as it were. And so really that anxiety, that signal from my body, was the beginning of my journey towards sound healing. And it took a little while. Of course, I was trying to understand what the issues were, because it was a lot of sort of in medical speak they say comorbid issues. It was a lot of seemingly different issues that were sort of coinciding at once, with the physiological and the mental and so on and so forth. And through that sort of journey of understanding, I realized, well, I need to really focus on wellness. And so I just started to change my life. I changed my diet. I quit drinking alcohol. I started trying to eat healthier. I started working on my gut health, because I had learned in that journey that was very important for our brain chemicals to function properly, and to have the proper levels of serotonin, which of course is related to the anxiety. And so I just began to make all of those changes, and I started to feel a lot better. I also started to practice yoga. And so, yeah, I started to feel better and better. And so for about 2.5 years, I was feeling just exponentially better. And then the sort of deep anxiety that was referenced in my bio sort of came after that 2 years of feeling a lot better, practicing yoga, changing my diet. And then it was like a sort of a supernova of like all of my deepest existential fears kind of came up in this one experience. And in a way, it was really helpful, though, because it helped me to understand my nervous system. It helped me to understand how my mind and my psyche and my subconscious was processing all of this in my subconscious, and how that was expressing in my nervous system. And so it was kind of an unraveling in a way, or maybe like in computer terms, it was almost like defragging the hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that experience really opened me up to a lot of insight. And one of those insights was just that everything is vibrational, and that, my nervous system was responding to my perceptions. But when I sort of cleared off the windshield of my nervous system, so to speak, it was like I started to just notice how in a very visceral way how my perceptions and my thoughts showed up in my nervous system as, essentially what we would call vibrations or sensations. And as a musician, that made me extremely curious in terms of like, how do vibrations affect us? I began to notice, of course, our ears are sensing vibrations, our eyes are sensing vibrations and frequencies. And so our nervous system, really all of our sense organs are set up to perceive those vibrations. So it really just ignited my curiosity with how can sound be part of this wellness journey. And so that's really what started me on the path from, I guess, from just traditional musician to becoming, I guess, a sound healing musician is what you would say, and really employing techniques that would be helpful in terms of relaxing the body, relaxing the mind, and the overall nervous system. So yeah, that's kind of, in a nutshell, the journey. And so for the last, I guess, since 2012, which has been many years, even though it feels like I'm just beginning this journey, yeah, I've been exploring the sound, healing. I make recordings, and I essentially, experiment with some of these insights and try to share things that are helpful in that process.
Yeah, wow. That's amazing. I didn't know that about your story about so very relational for me, because it sounds like you just read my own experience with with the getting into a healthier diet and lifestyle and feeling really good, and like because I also have always, well, for a long part of my life, experienced anxiety. And when I switched my diet in 2011, I got onto a plant-based diet focused on raw foods and just holistic living. I felt like my anxiety, I mean, it did. It pretty much went away for the most part. I didn't really feel that anxiety much anymore. And then a couple of years later, it was like you said, it was like a supernova. It was like this deep rooted, probably just, I don't know, just really childhood trauma stored anxiety that is just deep down in there. It just kind of came out, and I'm still to this day working on releasing some of those those anxious tendencies, and regulating my nervous system, and just kind of working through that. And so yeah, I just really it was like listening to my own experience there. But yeah, so then with the sound, I agree. Like the and I'm not exactly sure what type of diet you transition to, but from what I've experienced, it, and just through my research, plant foods and antioxidants and B vitamins and things that support the nervous system, help to activate the parasympathetic nervous system by reducing oxidative stress and detoxification and things. And there, I thought that was going to be all that there was to it, but now I'm realizing that it's so multifactorial. There's so many factors to our perceptions, as you mentioned, and how that impacts how our nervous system responds, and just our experience in this life. So that's why I'm just so now I'm kind of moving my studying and practice into more sound, because there's something about it that's just so profound. And when you start to look into it, you see how sound affects everything. And, people don't think about how sound impacts our biology, our cell function, our hormones, our genetic expression, our detoxification, all these different things. And if people kind of thought about it, you get into the car or whatever, you turn on a song that you love, it immediately changes your state of mind and how your body feels. And you could put on a sad song or a scary song, and it would change your hormones and how you feel. So it's easy to see, like even feel it for yourself by just realizing how just songs can change your physical state of mind. Um, and so, yeah, I'm just curious. How do you um, see sound therapy and, you know, that sort of thing complementing, a healthy diet and lifestyle, whatever that may be?
Yeah, it's well, as you say, there's so many factors, and sound is and sound frequency is one of those factors. But maybe just to quickly sort of share my own viewpoint about the total picture that I've seen in my own healing journey is
Mm-hmm.
that there's the diet is hugely important, as we've both discovered, and I think diet is one of the easier things for people to change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it might be hard to start practicing meditation or being really aware of your thought processes, but it's a little more straightforward to just change some things about our diet. And so I found that diet was a huge part of it. And then, of course, meditation and yoga have been a huge part of it. And so it's not really one or the other. It's kind of like everything coming together. And I've noticed how each of those things supports the other. And so in my particular diet changes, I am vegetarian. I'm not strictly vegan or raw.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the changes that I really focused on was specifically the gut, and choosing foods that helped to encourage good gut bacteria, and also eating things that help to cleanse out and flush out the bad bacteria. And so that's been a huge part of my process, and that really helped to sort of clear up a lot of the brain fog, a lot of the anxiety, a lot of those physiological reactive things that I would go through. And so just maybe a helpful or useful way to look at it is like if we imagined like a pyramid, then at the bottom of the pyramid, I would say, are physiological considerations, and those considerations are things like diet, exercise, maybe breath work, yoga, asana. All of those physical and physiological things might be in that bottom part of the pyramid. And then in the middle part of the pyramid, I look at sort of more like psychological things like relational dynamics. How am I showing up in relationships? How do I set boundaries? How do I, find relationships that are healthy and nurturing? And so I feel like that's one whole aspect of healing too. It's the psychological aspect. Mm-hmm. And then sort of at the top of the pyramid, I see like existential concerns and topics like who am I, is there a spirit world? What happens when we pass on? What happens to our ancestors? All of those sort of existential, deeper questions. And so all of those things sort of fit together too, but the sort of through line that I see to each aspect of that pyramid is vibration. And, we can look at our physiological choices, whether it's food or exercise, and we could say, well, that affects our nervous system and the vibration. And we can look at the psychological aspect, and we can say, well, that also affects our nervous system, which affects our vibration and our emotions. And the same with the spiritual concerns. We might have existential fears that we're sort of carrying in the subconscious, and when we can sort of understand those better and release that as having a drag on the entire nervous system through the subconscious, we feel freer and more liberated, I guess you could say, at each of those levels. And I see sound and frequency as impacting our physiology and our nervous system at each level. And so, like as you mentioned, you could be in the car and you experience different emotions, and it immediately shifts your state. With sound therapy, I'm really looking to help our minds get out of their habitual patterns, and to sort of move over more into our right brain, and then also to help our brain waves begin to relax down into these lower meditative states, where our brain waves are moving a little bit slower and smoother, and where we might have less thoughts, and that also activates our parasympathetic nervous system, as you mentioned. And so all of these sort of different practices or different considerations, we can sort of begin to consciously notice in our lives. And once we become conscious of them, we can just simply make little changes here and there, and then notice the positive downstream effects.
Mm. Yeah, that's it's so interesting how it's difficult for people to recognize their habitual patterns, their emotional habitual patterns, um, their psychological patterns, until because everything is life is busy, people are stressed, it's hard to really focus, and when we get stressed, our attention or our awareness narrows, and so it's kind of like we're in a survival mode. And so with the sound therapy, how you just shared that it can immediately change our state. That's a big factor in helping us to widen our awareness, as you were saying, and just change those patterns. Because I myself, and I don't know if I'll ever completely get all my less desirable habit patterns where I want them to be. I'm always working towards it, but how have you experienced that change? Like, has sound therapy and music helped you to change some of those patterns? I assume yes, but and then also I was just curious. I know you were focusing on digestion and your gut. Um, how has sound therapy benefited that, if at all?
Sure. Um, so, yeah, let me, I guess, start with the first idea, and feel free to get me back on track if I.
Sure. Sorry, I threw two questions at you.
So, do you mind saying the first question again?
Yeah, basically just it. I mean, for me personally, and I know for a lot of people that I've worked with, it's just it's hard to even recognize that we have these habitual patterns that kind of keep us stuck and repeating old behaviors. So how do you see sound therapy benefiting people in terms of helping to change those patterns, or even just becoming aware of them? And how has that affected you, I suppose?
Yeah, I think becoming aware is the first thing. And then you had mentioned another piece about how, we can either have contractions um, from those fears or sort of expansiveness, expanding our awareness or even expanding our nervous system, and we experience that all the time through either, when we're experiencing stress, we feel tension, maybe our breathing shortens, becomes more rapid. Um, as you mentioned, even in our perceptions, when we're experiencing fear, we sort of narrow our focus naturally um, instead of seeing the bigger picture. And so there's a number of things that can happen in response to fear and stress. Um, and um, so, and of course, some of those are habit patterns, as I mentioned. Um, in yoga and Buddhism, they often refer to those habit patterns with the term samskaras.
Hmm.
And samskaras are like impressions within our nervous system, or we could think of them as sort of habit patterns. And by virtue of them being habit patterns, they are unconscious. In other words, we don't think about it. So we don't think about when we're driving to the store, we don't think about every move we made with the steering wheel or the gas and the brake because it's just an automatic thing. Or conversely, when we're brushing our teeth at night, we don't think about what we're doing with our muscle movements because it's such an automatic thing. And so we can say that that is somewhat unconscious. Similarly, as a musician, I might learn something on guitar and spend hours and hours and hours essentially trying to make the physical movements unconscious. And that's really what our muscle memory is doing in those times. And so the reverse of that is just to try to become more conscious and aware. And many times our own identity is sort of the unconsciousness behind that either expansiveness or contractiveness. We think this thing is happening to me, or I must achieve this, or I must do that, or I must obtain that in order to feel relaxed. And so subconsciously, the mind can sort of relate everything back to this identity, which is often sort of where that unconsciousness lies, because it's just in the subconscious mind, it's just a given that this is all happening to a me,
Mm-hmm.
or that this version of myself must achieve or do or obtain X, Y, or Z. And so there's always those cycles of expansiveness and contractedness. And it's pretty easy to notice in wellness because there's so many therapies for expansion. You could get a massage, you could go to the sauna, you could, sometimes just a great expansive meal with fresh fruits and vegetables might be expansive. So in wellness, there's a lot of expansive modalities to really counteract the restrictions and the natural tensions that we feel from stress. And I would say that sound is somewhat similar in that the more we become simply conscious of how sound affects our nervous system and our brain waves, we can simply choose those. And so in sound therapy, as I'm playing singing bowls, I might be playing them randomly. And so sort of the random nature is mimicking actually the sounds of like the natural world, like birds and bugs and streams. And so there's a mimicking of that randomness of sound. And that also sends a signal to our system that there's a safety there. We can let down our guard and sort of bring in those peaceful sounds. Mm. And the other piece of it is just bringing our brain waves into those more meditative states, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm. And that's also expansive because as we relax the brain waves, those brain waves are connected in the parasympathetic nervous system to our heart rate and then also our breath rates. And so as we begin to relax those and move into meditative states, our heart rate begins to calm and slow, and our breath rate begins to calm and slow, and our entire system starts to expand. And often when we do that, we also get an expansion, mentally and in the mind. We start to have insights. We might start to view things in a different way. We might start to realize we don't need to be so trapped into an identified sort of viewpoint or perspective. And we can sort of release those aspects of identity, of our own identity, that are keeping us trapped in stress. And so part of it is just a noticing. And when we notice things, we're starting to break out of that habit pattern. And it can be the simplest things that we do every day, like, I'm just going to make up a scenario. Maybe you come down to the breakfast table and there's, another family member or somebody in your life that's there, and, you have these reactive patterns with that person that are causing stress. And then maybe gradually, as you're starting to notice all of these different patterns through these practices, you start to realize you don't have to react to those patterns. You don't have to perpetuate the same old stressful patterns. And so you just begin to change yourself. And through very small changes, maybe a lot of things change. And it helps us to experience more ease in our life. And so it's just, part of it is just simple as noticing. But that noticing process may be somewhat delayed behind the practice process. So we may take up a practice and feel like, oh, nothing's happening, Mm-hmm. But over maybe a week or 2 weeks or months, we do start to notice a changing. And part of that changing is just noticing small things that we make small adjustments to. So those are just some sort of thoughts around that. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that helps to also understand how sound might fit into that entire puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating because I've experienced that as well with, just understanding that, and this is something that just came to me after I, again, started cleaning up my lifestyle. I was working on de-stressing and all that stuff, but I realized, so like when I was younger, I was terrified of bugs, right? If I had a bug crawling on me, I would immediately react out of fear and, anxiety and things. But eventually I realized, sometimes there would be a bug crawling on me and I wouldn't know about it. And my nervous system and my stress was fine, but the bug was still there.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't until I brought my awareness to see that that bug was there, and my perception of the bug being on me, and that's what was creating the fear response. Um, and so I was just like, so the bug has been on me and I've been fine for who knows how long. But now that I know it's there, now I'm starting to get all nervous. So do I really need to be nervous if the bug is on me, or can I just gently, flush it, swipe it off? So that was one of the things that I noticed as I started to clear out, my mind and work through some of those issues. So yeah, I mean, it's our perceptions are powerful, and I feel like people don't consider the effects of just the power they have over how they're going to perceive things, and using things like sound therapy, which my understanding is, and I know you've talked about this, it affects the pituitary gland, or the pineal gland, or both probably.
Hmm.
The pineal gland, is associated with our spiritual connection, intuition, and things. And so I have noticed definitely that my intuition has increased, which is why I named my channel Raw Intuition. Um, and so yeah, I just see sound therapy and really understanding the effects on our biology, our physiology that sound has, and how that's another powerful tool that we can add on, incorporate into our practices, not just focusing. Because I feel like a lot of people get focused, like they get into the diet, and that's just where they stick forever, and there's
Hmm.
so many other aspects that we can learn about and utilize. So yeah, I don't know. It's just what.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's kind of like you're increasing your sensitivity
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
to subtle awareness, and so sound is part of that. You simply become more subtly aware, and I guess diet could be like that too. The more you eat healthy foods that have a lot of nutrients and that your body reacts to in a certain way, then if you go back to eating some junk food for like even just a snack or a meal or whatever, you might notice it immediately
yeah,
because your awareness and your body's awareness to that input has changed. And similarly with emotions or perceptions, would be similar. The more you become subtly aware because you're sort of purposefully creating a healthy diet of emotions and thoughts that you're used to, when something else comes along, you simply notice it in your nervous system a little bit more. And an analogy that I like is like when you're a little kid, before you understand that something's dangerous, like touching the hot stove,
mm-hmm.
maybe the first time you did that, you didn't recognize that there would be a consequence, or which is the sensation of burning. And so you just did it. But once you experienced that consequence, you were, very mindfully aware of not doing that. And similarly, I think with our thoughts, our emotions, and our entire nervous system, we sort of just get into a habit pattern of not being aware and sort of consuming that junk food of the mind and that junk food of the identity. And we just sort of, grab those negative thoughts, those negative emotions, or those perceptions. And over time, we just lose the sensitivity to it. And it just is something that becomes unconscious. So part of this process, I think, of wellness, of maybe awakening is another word, is becoming more sensitive and aware, And it's through that sensitivity and awareness that we also begin to sort of notice all of those habit patterns. And those habit patterns are also just places that we've lost that sensitivity and awareness to cause and effect. So it really just comes down to noticing cause and effect.
Mm.
So anyway, I just wanted to share those thoughts.
Yeah.
Something you said spurred that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Does one thing I'm kind of looking into right now is, the frequency of, instruments or music, uh, is so 432 versus 440. Um, can you explain a little bit of about that and how what the difference is? And because as I understand, most music today is played in 440 versus 432. Is 432 really that much more healing for us, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's probably a very subtle difference. And, I discovered it just through articles, probably around the time that I was getting into sound healing, so probably around 2011 or 12, and it's sort of become a movement over the last decade or so. So there are many articles, many opinions about it that you might find out there on the web. Mm-hmm. 432 apparently used to also be called Verdi tuning, after the opera composer Verdi. And so it was a little bit easier, I guess, for the singers in that tune. So 432, of course, is just 8 hertz less than 440 hertz. And for those of you that aren't musicians or don't know anything, hertz is simply Hertz, which is named after a scientist, Heinrich Hertz. Hertz is the number of cycles per second. So an A note at 432 is 432 cycles per second, and an A note at 440 is 440 cycles per second. So it's a very, very subtle and small difference. And 440 is somewhat arbitrary, 440 hertz. And by arbitrary, I mean that it probably is just a recent convention that we're used to, but there has to be some kind of standard that everyone sort of tunes to. So if you were going into a studio to play on a record, any time in the last several decades, you would tune your instrument to this standard, which was 440 hertz. And then I guess recently there's been more of a move back to that slightly lower pitch of 432 hertz. As far as the efficacy of that, I think that is more of a subjective thing that remains to be seen. There are some interesting mathematical things with 432 hertz, just how the frequency numbers themselves sort of end up mostly as whole numbers. So if you add 4 plus 3 plus 2, then that equals the number 9. And so many of the frequencies in that particular tuning also equal the number 9. And so there's sort of a symmetry mathematically to that tuning system, which I think a lot of people find interesting and also relate to other ancient numerical systems. For example, the number 108 is used a lot within yoga Like, for example, you've probably seen practices around New Year's of 108 sun salutations. Or the mala beads that are like prayer beads that are worn are 108 beads. And so 108 is also equal to that number 9, 1 plus 0 plus 8. And so 108 is an octave of 432. So 108 is also an A note. And then if we doubled that, it would be 216. So that would also be an A note. And then if we doubled 216, it would be 432, which is also an A note. And then interestingly, the Catholic rosary is 54 beads, so it's half of the 108. And so they're just little, I think, interesting connections like that people find interesting and sort of inform our choices. In my own sound setup, I sort of began to collect things at 432. I started to tune my guitars at 432 and things like that. I don't think personally that 440 is part of a deep, dark conspiracy or that it's bad for you or anything like that. I think it's just something that sort of evolved and sort of, you know, the standardization became that particular number. And I think 432, conversely, is not something that's going to, you know, make the heavens open and, you know, bestow enlightenment to all the listeners of 432. But it's maybe a subtle difference. Maybe it's a little more mellow of a sound and maybe just a little more relaxed. And so any of those sort of subtleties, I think are worth exploring and experimenting with.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah, it's always been an interest of like kind of those occult or esoteric topics, like why they chose 440 and all that sort of stuff. So cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. Would you like to, I know you have your bowls there and your instruments. Would you like to share a little bit about them and maybe do a demonstration?
Yeah, totally. So I'm going to move this mic a little closer here. So I started collecting these bowls, right after that second, what I would say is anxiety or awakening. And in that awakening process, I felt like I could feel vibrations, like even in nature, in the earth. That's kind of the level of sensitivity that sort of happened after my nervous system sort of defragged everything. And so I was looking for that similar vibration in an instrument, and I found it in these singing bowls. And so when I heard the singing bowl, to me it was like hearing that subtle sound of nature and sort of the vibrations of the earth. So I'm going to play the biggest bowl. And so you can hear the low tone, but you can also probably hear the whoa, whoa, whoa sound. And then, that's probably my lowest bowl. And then I move to more mid-range here. And that's about the same note, which is an F sharp. And here's a higher F sharp. Oops, let me turn on my microphone. So all of those are F sharp. And then I have other notes here, and each of these are sort of in a chakra scale of my choosing. I have E, an E note, which is solar plexus. I have a G sharp there, which is throat. A D sharp, which is sacral chakra. Let's see, I have the A sharp or B flat, which is that pineal that you mentioned, and then the C. So I kind of have a collection here that's kind of a scale. Let me play those in order. So. And so hopefully you can sort of hear the scalar pattern coming out there. And so also these metal singing bowls, they're not just one single note. They are many overtones within each bowl. And so there's kind of a mixing of overtone notes at the same time that you're hearing that scale note.
Mm-hmm.
So would you like me to maybe just play a little bit for a minute or two?
Sure, yeah, that would be great. And what I'm noticing, it definitely enhances the experience for the viewers. If you have headphones, it definitely, from what I'm hearing right now, it just sounds so much more resonant, and you really pick up a lot of those tones better than just playing it like on your phone. So if they have headphones, to definitely put those on.
Yeah, definitely. And it helps to sort of tune into those subtleties we've been discussing, and you sort of hear that dreamy overtone sound. So I'll just play for a minute or two and check back in.
Great.
So if you're out there listening, maybe just take this moment to be tuned in and mindful. Maybe close your eyes and sort of just begin to notice your breath. Notice that stillness within you. And just allow these sounds to guide you towards relaxation. So that gives a sort of small taste of this. And just to quickly explain, maybe to listeners that aren't familiar, sort of the random nature of the playing of the bowls allows us to release our left brain focus. So our left brain is always interpreting patterns. So we're noticing cause and effect all the time. And the way that works with music is that we're noticing harmony, melody, rhythm. We notice what genre we're listening to. We make a judgment about whether it's good or bad. And so that's our left brain at work. But when I'm playing these randomly, it sort of helps us to release all of that part of that aspect of our mind that is imposing itself upon our perception and reality. And it allows us to just sort of take a vacation a bit and just, it's kind of like when we're in nature, we can just notice the wind in the trees, or maybe the crickets or the birds singing, and we aren't judging any of that, we're just sort of noticing it. And so similarly with the singing bowls. In addition, they produce those oscillations, those sort of wah, wah, wah sound. Mm-hmm. And that gently begins to help our mind start to relax and move into those meditative spaces, those brain waves that are more conducive to noticing the bigger picture and of expansion. And then finally, just to circle back around to the pineal gland that you mentioned before, these sounds help us to produce melatonin, which is produced by our pineal gland. And when our pineal gland activates at night due to less light, it releases that melatonin, and it helps us also begin to move through those brainwave states. And so when we do that at night, we just go to sleep. And when we go to sleep, we open up our subconscious mind and we dream. However, when we're working in the meditative space, we open up the subconscious mind, but instead of falling asleep, we remain conscious. And it's in that ability to remain conscious, in our witnessing of the subconscious, that we begin to notice those habit patterns. We begin to notice all of those things that might create, habit patterns that lead to chronic stress, and we can begin to notice those and change those. And so, it's very similar and parallel to like even a psychedelic process. It's an expanding and an ability to notice in a different way.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much for playing the bowls for us. And I feel a difference like immediately when I start listening to the bowls. And I have noticed that, so I play them before I go to bed, every night now. And I've noticed my sleep has been better from that. And so I wonder if it is helping to produce more melatonin, and things like that. But it's so calming. You can feel your nervous system really just kind of just calm down and kind of just uh, resonate with the bowls. Um, oh, I had a question I was going to ask based on that. Oh yeah, so personally, so I'm very drawn to D and G type bowls, and I get C as well. And like I didn't even know that based on anything, because again, I don't really have any musical training or anything. I just learned this after I've kind of been looking into it, because I would hear the bowls and then I would be like, oh, I really like the sound of that one. and I would find out it would be like a D or a G or C. And then I looked into how certain notes are associated with different chakras, like you mentioned earlier. Um, and so that's been, well, one of the things that have it's been part of my journey is improving my communication, self worth, self expression, these sorts of things, and learning that I have a kind of a draw to some of these bowls that are associated with the different chakras that are associated with those types of emotional things. uh, do you do you have, for somebody out there that is looking into getting a bowl or something like that, um, do you recommend that they just go by what sound they're drawn to, or should they look in, should they kind of study the chakra system and see, and then like look at where they struggle, or what their like goal is, I guess, for healing or anything like that, and then pick a bowl based on that? Or kind of how do you suggest people would go about that?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, just going with your intuition is a great way to do it. That's actually what I did, even though I had all of this musical training. I was already a sound engineer and knew a lot about frequency and hertz. Honestly, in that process of going from musician to just exploring these sounds on a completely different dimension,
Mm-hmm.
I found it refreshing and really nice for me to let go of all of the intellectual baggage, I guess you could say,
Mm-hmm.
and just choose the sound that resonated for me. And I think after I had maybe a handful of bowls that I had already purchased, then I started, re-engaging with like, what note is this or what note is that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think for the average listener, I mean, there are, of course, sellers that sell things by the note. So, if you have a note you're drawn to, there's certainly nothing wrong with going with that. But I think just sitting down, like if you're in a singing bowl shop and maybe playing a few different ones and seeing what you just like,
Mm-hmm.
which one sort of helps you breathe that sigh of relief and sort of gives you that moment of peace. Because that's really the main thing, is beyond all of those other energetic considerations, is that the singing bowl can just be like a tool for reigniting our wonder, like our childlike wonder, reigniting our mindfulness to just sit and listen to the sort of layers of sound that come out of these bowls. So, yeah, I always kind of default to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to get very scientific and intellectual with frequency and all of these other things. But in some ways, it's also not the most important part of it. The most important part, in my view, is just, reconnecting to wonder, reconnecting to allowing yourself the space to relax and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and I want to mention, so you are, from what I understand, you're the co-founder of the Ohm Store. Is that correct?
No, I'm actually not.
Oh.
I just work closely with them.
Oh, okay.
And so Frank is the co-founder. Frank Moserino owns the Ohm Store, and
Mm-hmm.
his sister Nikki was the co-founder. And Nikki's
I see.
not as active now, but yeah, they started it. Now they have several employees, and
Okay.
so I lead the sound school courses.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I took your can't remember the name of it. The mastery of sound or sound mastery or something. It was basically a sound course, which I really enjoyed. So I definitely recommend people go check that out at the Ohm store. That's actually where I got my first bowl, the Purity Bowl, which I really like. Um, and so, yeah, I just wanted to mention if people are looking for a bowl, they could definitely check out the Ohm store and look at the different courses that Jonathan teaches over there. Is there anywhere else people can, do retreats with you or take courses or anything like that you want to share?
Sure, yeah. I have a website which is called sonicyogi.com. I'm also on Spotify and Apple and other streaming services. And then I'm also on Insight Timer, which is a meditation app. It's a free app. I have a lot of free content there, and I also have courses there that are for meditation. And I've been considering doing live retreats. So if you're interested in a live retreat, please sign up for my email list on my website, and I can let you know about that.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, I've got the links to Jonathan's website, his Instagram, his YouTube, and the Ohm store down in the description box of this video. So definitely go check that out. And should we see if there's any questions quick before we sign off from the audience?
Sure.
All right, let's see if there's any questions here. Hop over to the Q&A room. So thank you everybody for being here. Carl, I've been seeing your comments. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I'm glad you're enjoying the discussion and the demonstration of the bowls. Carl does have a question. He says, "What bowls would you advise to get for a beginner on a budget? Can all singing bowls be beneficial, even if slightly cheaper? Thank you."
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, honestly, I've got so many of my bowls on very sale prices. And so my strategy in the beginning, of course, this was many years ago, was to go on eBay, and I would find eBay sellers that were selling things for cheaper. There are two basic types of metal bowl. This particular bowl that I have here is a machine-made bowl, so you can see that it's very smooth on the outside. And then the other type is hand-hammered. And so you can see kind of the hammer marks in that bowl. Typically, the hand-hammered is a little more desirable in terms of having a lot of overtones and sort of depth. Whereas the machine-made are have less in terms of overtones, but they're a little bit more centered on a note. But if you're getting your first bowl, I think to really get into that sort of meditative and dreamlike overtone space, I would suggest hand-hammered singing bowls. And you'll just notice that they're a little more irregular looking. They have maybe some hammer marks and things like that.
Yeah.
And generally, it will also say in the description. These machine-made bowls are typically cheaper in terms of price, but perhaps not exactly what you're looking for at the very beginning. And so I would say in terms of price, maybe look for used singing bowls. You might find somebody on eBay, just somebody that found one in their basement or something, and those are good. Also, the Ohm store has new singing bowls, and the quality of their bowls is extremely high. I would say you can't go wrong with any of theirs. If you want to purchase there, you can use the code Sonic Yogi 10, and that'll give you 10% off. They also often have sales and things like that. So yeah.
All right, outstanding. Yeah, I didn't know that about the different ways that they're made. So I take it that the Purity Bowl is a machine made bowl, right? Because it's so smooth.
I believe that is also
Oh, is it? Okay.
hammered,
Oh, okay.
and most of the Ohm Stores bowls are going to be hammered.
Okay.
They look fairly smooth. I believe this is inner space, but it's similar to a Purity bowl. But you can see on the outside sort of it's not deep indentions, but
Yeah.
you can tell the difference. If it's maybe hard to tell on the camera, but if you were to look at this in real life, this is the machine bowl, and it's just like extremely smooth.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I see that now. I can see the indentations on the rim here, especially. So, yeah. Okay. Great. Cool. Let's see here. Yeah, Carl says secondhand from eBay. He says, yeah, he's super grateful. So thank you for sharing that information. All right. Any other questions before we sign off here? I'm not seeing anything in there. Give it another second or two for anyone to pop something in. Otherwise, do you have just any closing remarks or takeaway messages that you want to share?
Well, I'm sure everyone on this particular podcast may find themselves in a different place, and I assume since you have some focus on nutrition and diet, they might be starting there. I would encourage you to also, consider exploring meditation, exploring yoga, and really maybe considering how that is all part of a similar journey. So I've found just the habit of meditating every day helps me to, I guess, maintain that sensitivity that we explored about earlier. It helps me to sort of work through my own habit patterns and gradually find more peace, gradually establish more peaceful patterns as I go. I've been on this journey for over a decade now, and I'm still feel like I'm constantly growing, and so I find that daily practice is really helpful.
Yeah, terrific. Well, thank you so much. Like I said at the beginning, I really appreciate the information that you share and just the music that you make and just bringing awareness to this field of sound healing and just mindfulness and nervous system regulation, all these things. Because it's funny. I think we have like phases in our life where we're just always kind of, or if you're seeking it, anyways, you can really start to incorporate or move up in different things. So like, I was focused on diet for so long, and now I still am passionate about that, but now I'm bringing in the sound therapy and those sorts of things, meditation and all that, breath work and other somatic work. So I think we're always evolving, and I appreciate you helping me with my journey and my evolution and helping everyone else. So thank you again. And Carl also says thank you so much. He's very grateful. So yeah, I appreciate it. And again, guys, check out Jonathan's links in the description box down below. I highly encourage you to follow him and learn from him if you're interested in this topic. So that's all we got. And check us out next week, same time, same place, and we'll have another show for you. So Thank you so much, and take care. Always follow your raw intuition.